Hey guys, and welcome to Comics and Cosplay. I'm your host Ian from Saturday Morning Cosplay. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the top 10 best new comic books of 2014. But before we get into that, I'm proud to announce our new sponsorship partner, Midtown Comics. And if you don't know, Midtown Comics is one of the largest comic book stores in the United States and have 3 conveniently located stores all throughout Manhattan. However, if you're not in New York City, don't worry, you can still access their great selection of comics and other merchandise on their website at midtowncomics.com. So be sure to check them out. So with all that said, let's get started. Coming in at number 10 is Ghost Rider. Now I'll be the first to admit that I need to eat some crow about this book, as if you will recall, in my all-new Marvel Now preview book, I thought this was one of the worst book ideas listed and would be canceled very quickly. I was pleasantly surprised that I really enjoy this book and think it's actually really well done. Now, I'll still contend that the Ghost Rider in a car and not, on a motorcycle is a little hokey and the whole flames aspect is a little goofy. But I still think this book does a really good job of telling a story, and even that of a multicultural story of being from a Hispanic primary character's point of view. And the author isn't really cheesy or, uses a lot of colloquialisms or things that are just over the top that make it silly and not an interesting read. I think it's been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate what this character has done, and I'm curious to see what they do in the next art. Next, at number 9 is Magneto. Now, I've been on kind of a roller coaster of emotions about this book. I was super excited to see Magneto getting his own book, and when it first came out, I thought the first issues were kind of and not that great. It was just, a lot of internal monologuing about, what it is to be Magneto and fight for his people. Nothing we had really seen or heard new. But, luckily I stuck with the book and kept on reading it. And I think it's really coming to its own, and it's got like a really interesting plot point. And I'm curious to see where it goes. And I think it's going to be the linchpin to fixing the X-Men and their whole broken power situation. So it's definitely something you should check out, especially if you're a Magneto and X-Men fan. Coming in at number 8 is Cyclops. Now, I admit I'm kind of a homer for Cyclops, as he's my favorite X-Men character. But I would also readily admit I'd be the first to say if this book was bad. And I have to admit, I think it's really great, because they're doing an interesting story dynamic here and telling a what-if story of, what if while Cyclops was younger, that he went off with his father on space adventures rather than teaming up with Xavier and becoming, the future leader of the X-Men. And I think these stories out in outer space are really interesting and show the cool dynamic that Scott could have had with his father if, they had stayed together and hadn't been separated at such a young age. And I'm only more excited and hope, this book starts to continually come out regularly, as it took a big hiatus during the summer. With all that said, I really love the story. I love the concept of, Scott out in space fighting along, becoming a pirate with his father, and I only hope the adventures continue. Coming in at number 7 is Amazing Spider-Man. Now, if I've learned anything over the last 2 years, it's not to question Dan Slott and his plans for Peter Parker, because I've loved everything that he's done, reaching back to the Superior Spider-Man series, which I was originally skeptical of, but ended up loving that, and was also skeptical of the return of Peter Parker, but I am really enjoying the series thus far. And I would have to say 90% of my love is the introduction and the creation of the new character Silk. She's essentially a female Spider-Man with all of Spider-Man and Peter Parker's powers, but just heightened and, more skillful. I think she presents an interesting dynamic in Peter Parker's life, and their amazing attraction to one another is an interesting dynamic that I'm curious to see going forward. And I think that's why this has become one of my favorite books and has re-energized my love for Peter Parker and Spider-Man. At number 6, it's time we show DC some love with Sinestro. Now, I have never been a huge Green Lantern fan because I think it gets caught up in a lot of continuity and all the ring colors kind of bore me over time. But I've really enjoyed this book because it's got a really just jump in plot and premise that you don't have to know a ton of backstory. Essentially, it's just Sinestro is on a redemption quest to save his people that have been scattered throughout the galaxy due to the destruction of their homeworld. And, it's just giving us this internal dialogue of his struggles to do good and, ultimately what's best for his people, but also trying to combat his natural tyrannical nature and personality. So I think it's a great read if you kind of want to read some Green Lantern stories, but don't want to have to deal with, all the other spectrums of color. And I think it's something you should definitely check out. At number 5 is a book I can't say enough good things about, and that's Moon Knight. And I'd have to say this book kind of caught me off guard and came out of nowhere at how amazing it really is. I've never read anything by Moon Knight or really Moon Knight stories before this, so I was a little skeptical that I might be, worried that I don't know all this history and backstory to really appreciate this book. However, I was pleasantly surprised that Warren Ellis does a really good job of telling stories that you don't need to know Moon Knight's backstory or how he got to this point to appreciate them. And what's also surprising is the fact that I like this book because each issue is more of kind of a one-off story. There's not like this huge line of continuity between the books. It's these like little individual creepy tales of like weird stuff and kind of paranormal activity, which makes this book really amazing. And Warren Ellis did just an amazing job on it. I'm only sad that his run just completed with the 6th issue and it'll be transferring over. But I think it's something you should definitely go back and grab because this is one of the most interesting and fun reads I've had all summer. Coming in at number 4 is Genius by Top Cow. Now this is probably one of the most time-sensitive and relevant books in all of comic books, as it's dealing with issues of race in the United States and how various racial groups deal and relate to the police. It's essentially the story of a woman that's essentially a tactical genius and military expert who's grown up in the hood and is going to war with the police over various issues and their brutality in her community. I think this book is really great for a couple of key reasons, not only its relevance and the brave and boldness of Top Cow to write a comic about such an issue, because let's be frank, DC nor Marvel would ever touch a comic book like this. And I think it's really bold and they should be commended for making something, so thought-provoking and, not just about selling, a quick buck here and there. And on top of that, I think it's great that we have a strong black female character. I feel like there's always a cry for strong female characters in comic books, but that's essentially a call for strong white female characters. We rarely see strong minority females in comics. I mean, I know we kind of have, Storm and Kamala Khan in Mrs. Marvel, but, it's nice to see that somewhere else and, hopefully, will spread to other comic books going forward. Coming in at number 3 is Marvel's Inhuman. Now, I was sold on this book just based off on who was doing the artwork. I'm a huge fan of Joe Moridia, or I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, but I'm a huge fan of his work. I loved what he did and how he draws. His characters are kind of like bulky and kind of stocky and feel very video game-ish. And, I loved his work on Avenging Spider-Man and the first 3 issues of that. So I was already sold there. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that it had a great story and introduced me to a lot of characters that I wasn't intimately familiar with. The basic plot of the book is to, talk about the fallout of the events of Infinity, in which Black Bolt blew up Attila and had the Terrigen Mist spread throughout the entire globe. And so now the story is about Medusa and, a new Inhuman trying to come together to, organize their people, figure out what happened to Black Bolt and, overcome all these other odds. And I think it's a great book, especially Medusa. I really love her as a character now. I think she's a strong female character that doesn't fall into, the stereotypical strong female archetypes of like, oh, let me stand up to female rights and oppose male oppression. Let me kick this super evil villain in the balls. And those guys are like, oh, get in the kitchen, woman. I'm glad it just avoids all those trappings. And she's a really great character because, she's not helpless because Black Bolt's gone, but, she's trying to really find her own way as a leader amongst the Inhumans and, dealing with all this fallout. So I think it's a great book and, has really given me a lot of new characters that I didn't appreciate before. Coming in at number 2 is Punisher. Now, I've never been a big Punisher fan, but I love this book. I think Punisher has a lot of problematic issues, and I think this book and the author were really wise to, alter and not fall in those trappings that I think that make Punisher, a boring character. For example, first, he's not just this angry, mean, Sylvester Stallone 80s action hero. He's got much more of a personality and a wit to him, and he cracks jokes and is much more compassionate with other individuals. Plus, I like the fact that they took him out of New York and put him out in Los Angeles, which gives him a nice, interesting dynamic in dealing with, that city and this, landscape there, as well as it gives him a new, interesting breed of criminals and people he has to interact with that aren't necessarily his predominant foes or villains in New York City. Also, I like the fact that his main, villain or nemesis in the book is a true arch, super villain and not just some crime mob boss. Because I think that's an interesting dynamic of, someone with superpowers taking on this kind of regular Joe Schmo character. And I think that makes him really great. And not to mention, the art in this book is amazing. It's like really, looks like it's straight out of a movie in certain pages, and just really helps, drive the book along even more. And this is something you should definitely read. Even if you're not a Punisher fan, go read the first arc of Punisher. It's amazing. So for my top new book of 2014, you might be guessing it's something from Marvel, but you would be incorrect, my friend, as my favorite book this year is Batman Eternal by DC. Now, I'm an on and off again Batman fan, but I think this book is really clever and doing something that I haven't really seen done in the Batman universe. Essentially, it's a weekly book about Batman, and really it's more about the city of Gotham as a whole, as different characters and individuals are trying to handle a basic catastrophe that's happened in the city, and then how it's affecting different members of the city, from the police department handling an issue, to various supervillains, to the whole Batman family and cast of characters trying to solve and resolve these issues happening into the city. It's much more of a Gotham book really than a Batman book, and maybe I only hope the new Gotham series will maybe take this kind of tone and approach and not get so focused on one character, because I really like that it really shows you what everyone in Gotham or everyone connected to the Batman world is doing at the same time, and isn't just honed in on one character, as if they're independent of everything else and no one's doing anything. And I think the weekly nature of this book really helps, because you get to jump to all these different stories of characters and still feel connected and not feel like it's all scattered and all over the place like a lot of other books do. So that concludes my list of the top 10 best new books of 2014. And now I'm sure some of you are asking where's Guardians of the Galaxy and where's Miss Marvel? These are great books. Well, I haven't loved Guardians of the Galaxy this year. I think the fact that they've, tried to shoehorn them into every other book and property to raise awareness for the movie this year has really hurt the characters in the books, because they can't tell a really cohesive story since they're always pulling characters here and there to make guest appearances. And as for Miss Marvel, I think it's an okay book. I think it gets a little too after-school-y special of feeling empowered about yourself and being happy with who you are inside and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that's inherently bad or anything, and there's definitely a need for those books, but I don't think just because it fulfills those requirements makes it a good story. I think a lot of that self-empowerment stuff really gets in the way of the storytelling, and I don't really understand or really care about a lot of the motivations of other characters and kind of why they're showing up. Hopefully maybe as it progresses they can kind of get away from that and go to just telling some good stories of Camilla and show that she's, confident in herself without her saying it in the pages all the time. But those are just my impressions. But let me know what you guys think. I want to hear, what are your top new books of 2014, that came out this year that, have really made an impact or you think are great and people should pick up. Let me know in the comment section down below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to our videos, as we've got a slew of new videos coming out, recapping my experiences at Dragon Con, as well as our new Road to New York Comic Con series, where we're going to be interviewing as well as giving a lot of tips to get you ready for New York Comic Con coming up next month. Well, as always, I'm your host Ian from Saturday Morning Cosplay, and I'll see you on the con floor.